So like we talked about a couple of days ago, every single servant in the game is going to be getting a rate up for the Grand Servant system. If you don't know, basically, you're going to be able to take a servant that you have gotten to Bond 10, I believe, grailed to level 100, not 120, and have their skills fully done to a Grand Servant level. I believe the only thing that we know that this benefits you for is that you can actually use their Bond CE in addition to a normal one. We don't know if you have to pay the cost for both of them. I'm assuming the Bond CE would just be free on your Grand Servants. Otherwise, I don't know if that'd actually be all that good because team cost is already very limited as is, but I'm sure there'll also be like maybe a damage bonus or something, or maybe they'll just get, I don't know, some extra bonuses because they're your Grand Servant. Surely they're just not going to be only receiving the Bond CE, right? That'd be a little bit ridiculous. But since every single servant is getting a rate up, even though we're about 2 years off from this on the NA side of things, I did want to go ahead and document and give my thoughts on each of the rate ups, whatever they do come out every single week, because some servants, especially for like Sabers, have notable low rarity servants like Bedivere that do make some of these banners kind of crazy. So just to kind of go through these, we're not going to waste any time here. Let's just start going through these. The first one that we have is the Saber Astolfo banner that is featuring Landling and Caesar over here, and notably they actually did give Landling a buff because they cleverly kind of tied this, I imagine, to this banner over here, which, you know, Landling's not on Rada, but Landling is a part of Ordeal Call 1. So I'm assuming they were like, well, if we're able to give Kama a buff over here, right, then we can go ahead and give Landling a buff, and this times really well with him being a 4-star on rate up on some of these Saber banners. So this is actually a little bit better than you might see at a first glance, because Landling is kind of now another pseudo arts buffer servant, which is kind of unfortunate because arts, as I guess the perspective of a support type servant, is kind of just a lot of slop at this point, because you can just do whatever you want, right? Obviously, at the upper echelon, you have people like Proto Merlin, Castoria, you got your Tamamos, but then you just got all these other servants, right? Like, you've just got Asclepius, you've got Paracelsus, you got Jufu, you've got Caskill, now you have Landling. Like, you know what I mean? Like, slop not in a bad way, but there's just so many guys in the soup at this point that I guess if you did go on this banner and you pulled a Landling, that would be kind of cool. But I think the unfortunate timing for this one is that unless you're going to be making Astolfo your Grand Saber, you're just better off summoning on this banner, no? Like, we used Kama in yesterday's stream, and she's ridiculous, even when she's not landing the charm debuff, because we were going up against a boss that could not be debuffed, and she was still doing oogles amounts of damage. Like, she was still just absolutely slapping them up ways, you know, 5 ways to Sunday. And so you would just summon on this banner. Like, if you wanted Landling, this is just the superior single target quick servant to get. And on top of that, I'm assuming a lot of people are going to want to make Kama their Grand Assassin. So I don't think this banner is particularly worth going on unless you really want to make Astolfo your Grand Saber, which ultimately is the point for these banners. The Dio Scurry one I think is actually kind of solid just because they did receive a buff that did make them quite a bit better. It's kind of separated them from the Trung sisters in the way that they're definitively more the DPS servant you want to use, and then the Trung sisters are now like, I guess, this technical servant that gives, you know, a little bit of extra skills to the party. You know, they're more of a support DPS, which I guess is kind of cool, but as I will always say for characters like the Dioscuri twins, they are on every single banner, so unless you absolutely need or want them on your account, a wise thing to do is just to kind of let them come to you eventually, whether that be a random pull on a banner or a random 5-star ticket that we get, because we don't get those too often. But if you're fine with waiting for them, I think that's a proper way to go ahead and try to get them, and then actually use your Saint Courts to try to summon for the limited servants, because the limited servants aren't going to spook you unless it's on like a GSSR or a Destiny Order summon or something along those lines. And then Lakshmi Bai and Guile's Saber being the other sabers that are on rate up on this banner, I don't think are particularly worth it, but it could be, like, it's not bad, because at least even for a non-limited servant, the Dioscuri twins are very strong. Being given their own battery now, while also being able to just get around all invincibility and defensive buffs, it is very valuable. So this is solid enough on its own for the Dioscuri twins. It's just the other 2 servants that are on rate up over here are unfortunately not the best. Moving over here, this is actually, I would say, a rather solid one. With Ibuki Saber, I don't want to say not holding up as well. She has the 50% battery, which is always going to be really strong in a lot of these buster farming comps. But I think the unfortunate thing is that while she is still a strong, good servant, other AoE buster servants are just getting stronger and stronger buffs. Like, you already have Artoria, who can just do oogles of free damage. Then you have Mordred receiving a buff. You know, Salter received a buff. Now Arthur has a buff. All of these other servants are just kind of making up for the fact that they don't have a 50% battery. And that 50% battery is becoming less and less of a, I would say, a tier breaker between the two of them, because you already have people like Artoria that refund on their NP, or you have people like Arthur that can just do so much damage, or Salter that maybe they don't have a technical 50% battery, but you can refund like 70% of her NP back with her new skill upgrade. So it doesn't really matter as much. And then, you know, Tomoe Saber, I think is a very fun servant to use. She's definitely not bad, but she's one of those servants that you break out because you're trying to have fun, right? Which doesn't mean that she's the greatest servant, right? Like, as much of a Tomoe fan that I am, there are definitely better art sabers out there for you to use. So I don't think this is a bad banner, because Ibuki will always still be generally pretty good. She just has a solid kit overall, but probably needs a buff if they want her to kind of keep up with some of the other Buster AoE sabers, especially with how crazy of buffs they've been throwing out there. Especially with someone like Richard coming out, just being like a good generalist Buster AoE saber. And then someone like Tomoe, you could probably remove the demerit on her first skill, and that would probably help her out a lot. Fergus being the 3-star is a little bit of an L, because the one that you really want to try to go for are the ones that have Bedivere on it, like this one. Like, so far, this is the best one we've seen. It has Muramasa, who's a very strong 5-star. You can pick up additional copies of Bedivere, which is always really good. And then Saito being the 4-star, I think he's a very basic, straightforward servant, but kind of follow me on this. Does he not almost feel like a more modern version of Saber Lancelot, where he's just really basic in what he does? It's not like he's doing anything super crazy, but you kind of just throw him at a guy and he'll always kind of do the same thing. Like, he's just a very basic, straightforward servant, which sometimes it's just easier for newer players to have, or even veteran players. You know, I've been using somebody like BB Dubai for the last couple of months, and sometimes it's really annoying having to like pull up the wiki page and be like, okay, what are all the random effects she does again? Because sometimes these guys having 5 Bible chapters for skill effects can be a bit ridiculous when you're trying to remember what they do, especially if you're playing on the JP side and you can't actually natively read what they do, because, well, it's in Japanese and I can't read it. But this, I think, is a very, very strong banner. If you're somebody that is waiting for Muramasa on the NA side of things, and you're seeing that he's going to be getting another rate up in whatever point, you know, in the game's history in the next 2 years, this, I think, is a notable one to maybe keep an eye out on. Obviously, we still don't have the skill details for, you know, the Green Dragon Lady and Kurohime, I believe her name is. So they could be like the best servants in the game for all we know, and then they drop it, they're just absolutely nuts. But as of right now, this is not a bad banner to try to grab Muramasa on, because if you go in on this, the worst that can happen is maybe you pull additional copies of Bedivere, and Bedivere is still immensely useful. Even though I don't have Koyan Sky and I don't have Oberon, I still use him in like 90 plus or plus setups today. In fact, you can go on the channel and look up a video. I think it's called like, this guy needs to be nerfed or something. It's like NP1 Bedivere being used and like a 90 plus setup, because while it would be nice to have an NP5 Bedivere, he can still get the job done at NP1. So just a very, very powerful 3-star to get leveled up on your account, because then especially you're pulling additional copies, you're also getting coins and stuff for him, so you can start getting into his append skills, which will also be very, very powerful for him. So I do think this is a very strong banner to go for. There's also another banner that, ironically enough, I guess has Muramasa's rival on it. We'll get to that one when we get there, and you guys will see what I mean by that one. But the next one is the Okita Alter Saber over here that has K-Pop Man and Theseus on it. While I am a huge enjoyer of Okita Alter Summer, I don't think this is particularly worth going on, just because while Quick is really fun, it's probably the most fun I have playing the game, because you're refunding a lot, you're dropping a lot of stars. It is objectively the weakest of the 3 card types. It doesn't have the most supports like the other ones do, and it just has the hardest time. Like, it just doesn't do what the other cards are doing. Like, they can use Oberon in like the Scotty setups, but they just can't use it as well as, say, Arts can, because Arts can abuse Black Grail in pretty much every single team comp. And while not every Buster Servant can abuse Black Grail, the ones that can are bonkers, but every other Buster Servant can take full use of the additional buff of Oberon's 3rd skill, that being a big Buster buff, right? So they they both just synergize with him very, very well, whereas Quick doesn't really do either the same things, you know, so they're not going to be doing as much damage as the Buster team comps, and they're not going to be looping as well as the Art team comps, but they're kind of doing a little bit of both. But unfortunately, as we've kind of seen, and I'm sure a lot of people have kind of picked up on, Buster is really good for the reason that you don't have to rely on somebody looping NP back in these weird 90 plus or plus nodes. You're just always going to fire your NP because it's effectively raw battery farming, right? Like, let's call it what it is. It's just Clay and Sky and Oberon giving you a bunch of batteries and then letting you refund your battery back again. So while I do think she's a very, very fun servant to use, especially if you have like a double ruler Scotty plus the normal caster Scotty being plug suited in, you have so much refund and damage going around that it's really fun to use, and she will be doing some pretty good damage, but I don't think it's particularly worth going for unless you're trying to summon for the single mom over here. Then we have the Trunk Sisters, which I think are kind of unfortunate. They did throw Bargas on this banner to maybe try to entice some people to go for this banner because, let's be honest, Bargas is wildly popular, but if you're going to be summoning for a single target art servant, are you not just going to go for the Scurry twins? Because while it is really nice that they have this little technical play, you know, their skills give a little bit of buffs to the entire party, the way the meta is kind of at this point is that that's decent, I guess, if your account is not as good and you really do need something like that. For the most part, you're going to just buff one servant and have them go absolute ham-taro on a boss and probably kill the boss in like 3 turns or something, right? Or maybe you have to go to like turns 4 or 5, but the fights are really not going to last that long unless the boss is forcing you to stay in there for a long amount of time, whether it be like, I don't know, they have like 7 hits of 100% defense or something like that. You know, those bosses that stall you out, or they're like, I'm going to stun you for 3 turns and you have to sit there or something like that. So it is kind of nice. But realistically, you're probably just going to go for the Scurry twins because, in my opinion, they're better and they're also just easier to use, right? Just having a servant that has like Pierce invincibility and Pierce defense means you pretty much never have to worry about the boss having any defensive ability. So even though I think Bargas being a good selling point on this banner, let's also be honest, they probably should toss something Bargas's way in terms of buffs because I think her kit is a little bit awkward. Not saying that it's not good. You could definitely do some really good work with Bargas, but again, you probably do want to get some higher NP copies, and they could definitely toss something her way to make her just a little bit better. I think if they did do that, that would actually make this banner a little bit enticing, but maybe they don't want the selling point to be Bargas being the 4-star. It's like, no, you should go for the 5-star. We don't want to make the 4-star outshine them. Even though I think Salter outshines normal Artoria on her banner, that just went away. Then we have the Charlemagne banner. I think this is a pretty easy skip for a lot of people. Charlemagne is decent. Being able to do Black Grail farming as a quick servant, again, is a huge selling point because, again, that is one of the things that can kind of help Quick compete if you do have a servant that is capable of abusing Black Grail, because it gives them that level of synergy that Arts has with Oberon. And, you know, Oberon is just such a big part of the meta with how he's able to overclock your damage that having any synergy with him is very, very powerful. I just think it's unfortunate that Roland is your 4-star. Now, I think Roland is better than a lot of people give him credit for, but I also acknowledge that he's not the craziest servant ever, right? Like, people that think he's like complete hot dog water, I think are crazy, but again, it's not like he's that great. It's not like he's some hidden S-tier gem. So it's not exactly like you have the craziest 4-star on this rate up, and your 3-star is Giles, which is a little bit unfortunate. But maybe if you're a big enough fan of Charlemagne, that's enough of a pull to maybe have you pull on this banner if you want Charlemagne to be your Grand Saber, which I do think is a little bit fitting. You know, after going through Trauma and reading Fate Extella Link, I do think that that could be kind of fitting. I could see, you know, Charlemagne being like a Grand Saber in somebody's account. That could be kind of cool. But aside from that, I don't think it's exactly worth pulling on. Because again, you just have stronger options in the Buster pool for like the last banners and in the Arts pool for this one. Then we move over to Medusa Saber. So this is one that a lot of NA players probably aren't as familiar with, but I think this is one of the better single target quick servants in the game. Obviously, since I've had that opinion, we've gotten people like Melt's buff and Kama's buff, but I still don't think that Medusa Saber is all that far behind. She just has a really strong kit with good survivability, good, I would say, like technical abilities, or I guess like techniques that you can use, like, you know, like your stuns, or I guess for her, it's not stun. It's like, what, bind or something. It's like different than stun. And then just being able to put out good damage and having a solid power mod. I do think she's good enough that she's worth considering, because she's kind of one of those servants that I guess in the same vein that you would summon for Kama even if you don't have Scotty or Ruler Scotty, because she's just so good that you could always bring like a friend quick support, or just support her in your own way with like a Waver and a Merlin, or a Waver and a Castoria, or if you're really, really down bad on supports, you could do like a Waver and a Jufu, because the only thing she's really not getting out of a lot of those characters is the card buff, but even then, she's still getting the batteries, the crit damage, the survivability and stuff. That's all like really, really strong for her. I think Saber Gareth, as much as Gareth is a very popular character, is a bit unfortunate because she's not the best. I did see a lot of comments whenever she did come out that flipped from people being like, I don't care ZTL, I'm going to use Saber Gareth all over the place. This is my character, I'm going to use her, she's cute. And then the comments after she came out were like, man, this servant is not really good. People were not kidding when they just really left this servant out to dry, which is not, it's nothing against her, right? It's nothing to say that, like, you know, Gareth is a bad character or anything. That's just the fault on Lysengle. For some reason, they drop all these other, like, bonkers units that are ridiculously good. They drop Proto Merlin, they drop Summer Ibuki, they drop Summer Scotty, and then, you know, they put out, like, Summer Eris, who's really good, and Summer Wu, who at least has some, like, good, you know, niche applications in team comps. And then Gareth, where you're just like, okay, like, Lysengle, what do you want me to do with this servant, right? Like, you're not letting them buster farm, and then their kit's not even, like, particularly good. What do you want me to do with this servant, right? They're just, like, literally leaving a servant out to dry for no reason. It just doesn't really make any sense. But I still think that, I guess you could view it as Saber Medusa is good enough to summon for, and if you're a fan of Gareth, it could be a positive that you could get additional copies of her, because she is one of those servants that, if you can snag a couple of extra copies, then she becomes a bit more usable. I mean, go figure, you can kind of mask out for a worse kit if the NP damage is, you know, higher because they're like NP5 or something, but I still think there are better banners to summon on, but that could kind of be a little bit of cope if you want that to be a thing. Now, this is the banner that I actually threw a couple of Saint Quartz at, because Taku and Bedivere being on the same banner, I think is really strong. I mean, it does kind of mirror the Muramasa banner, and people don't want to hear it, you know, because people will always come into the comments and they're like, oh, I still think Muramasa is the better looping servant. I think Muramasa is better if you're trying to, like, speed blitz going into fights, because he has, like, the Pierce Invul and stuff. But if you're talking about better loopers, Taku's just better. Like, he's just going to be looping against enemies better. He's got the better kit for it. Go figure, the servant that is like 3 years, you know, older is not as good of a looper as the brand spanking new servant. I know you don't want to hear it. That doesn't mean Muramasa sucks or anything. That doesn't mean you can't use Muramasa. But I'm telling you from personal experience, bringing them both to different nodes, Taku just performs better, right? The ability to kind of selectively just neuter somebody's arts resistance on his NP is extremely strong. It might be a little bit of a skill check for some players because they forgot to target somebody. I'm sorry, skill issue. Learn how to use the servants a bit better. You gotta remember how to do that. But he is a very, very strong servant. And then having Bedivere on this banner, I think, is also really strong. Now, again, I think that does mean that for these round 2 Saber banners, the two that are going to probably be the ones that are worth considering are the Muramasa and the Taku one. And that just kind of depends on, you know, the beginning of the year when this hits on NA. The year before this one, if you actually went all out for Taku then, or if you were going to save for Ushi Gozen, who comes out right after her, or if you're just really, really stockpiling up for, like, you know, the summer events and stuff, because let's be honest, that year is really, really crazy. You have like Alco coming out, you have, you know, Summer BB coming out, you have CL, you have Beast Ereshkigal. It's a very, very stacked year. And so if you didn't summon for Taku, maybe it's worth trying to get him over here, throwing a couple multis his way, because he is very strong. He's also rocking some very strong power mods as well, and you can get some additional copies of Bedivere. But if you've already got somebody like, say, Summer Ibuki, you might be able to just go for Muramasa if you really like him, because he is able to still put in some work. I will say, though, that even my NP2 Muramasa on JP, granted, no Oberon over here on JP, but even at NP2 is still kind of falling off a little bit. I'm noticing that the stacking style of gameplay that Muramasa has, where he kind of wants to build up a little bit over the 3 waves, is not as good as just immediately being able to be like, I'm just destroying your arch resistance so I can smack you for a boatload of damage. But I think that is the last banner that we actually have, yeah, because then it's a story gacha. So I just wanted to go over here and kind of record these as somebody that is playing both versions of the game, looking at some of these characters and gonna be like, oh, well, this banner might not look as good, but, you know, this character got a buff. Or this is kind of my experience in using these characters for the last 2 or, you know, 1 year, depending on how long they've been out. And just wanted to kind of give you guys a little bit of heads up for it. So that way you can kind of just get this in your head now, because, you know, FGO is a game all about clairvoyance and knowing what's coming out, because let's be honest, they don't really be giving out the most amount of Saint Quartz. So being able to kind of plan when you're going to be doing your big summons, I mean, even if you're a paying player, right, you're not buying on every single banner. You want to know, okay, so yeah, I should probably, you know, put a little bit of extra money aside to summon on this banner. Or especially if you're free to play, it's like, okay, I'm going to hit like that banner and then that banner. Ooh, okay, this person gets a rate up later on. You know, maybe it's Taku, maybe it's Muramasa for you. And you could say, okay, well, I can actually skip this banner and I could go summon on that one instead. And that kind of opens up me to summon on, you know, whatever other servant is around the original banner you're going to summon on, right? So with all that being said, if you found the video to be informative or maybe even entertaining, I'd appreciate a like of the video and a subscription to the channel, as it is free and helps me out more than you know. There's also stuff like the Twitter, the Discord, and the Patreon, link down in the description down below. Nice little side note for the Discord and the Patreon: if you're subscribed to the Patreon, you also get access to a secret channel in the Discord, as well as Patreon exclusive videos. We actually just dropped another Patreon exclusive video the other day. So, you know, there are videos coming out over there. I'm trying to make it more incentivized for those people that want to go that extra mile. But with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace, late guys.